I have completed the construction of my burrow, and it seems to be successful. All that can be seen from the outside is a big hole. That, however, really leads nowhere. If you take a few steps, you strike against natural firm rock. I can make no boast of having contrived this ruse intentionally. It is simply the remains of one of my many abortive building attempts. But it finally seems to me advisable to leave this one hole without filling it in. True, some ruses are so subtle that they defeat themselves. I know that better than anyone. It is certainly a risk to draw attention by this hole to the fact that there may be something in the vicinity worth inquiring to. But you do not know me if you think I am afraid, or that I built this burrow simply out of fear. At a distance of some 1,000 paces from this hole lies, covered by a movable layer of moss, the real entrance to the burrow. It is secured as safely as anything in the world can be secured, yet someone could step on the moss or break through it, and then my burrow would be wide open, and anyone who liked anybody who liked. Please note, however, that quite uncommon abilities would be also required. Could make his way in and destroy everything for good. I know that very well, and even now, at the zenith of my life, I can scarcely pass an hour in complete tranquility. At that one point in the dark moss, I am vulnerable, and in my dreams, I often see a greedy muzzle sniffing around it persistently. It will be objected that I could quite well have filled in the entrance too, with a thin layer of hard earth on top and with a loose soil further down, so that it would not cost me much trouble to dig my way out again whenever I liked. But that plan is impossible. Prudence itself demands that I should have a way of leaving out a moment's notice. If necessary, prudence itself demands, as alas so often, to risk one's life. All this involves very laborious calculation, and the sheer pleasure of the mind in its own keenness is often the sole reason why one keeps it up. I must have a way of leaving at a moment's notice, for despite all my vigilance, may I not be attacked from the same quite unexpected quarter? I live in peace in the inmost chamber of my house, and meanwhile the enemy may be burrowing his way slowly and stealthily straight toward me. I do not say that he had better scent than I. Probably he knows as little about me as I of him. But there are insatiable robbers who burrow blindly through the ground, and to whom the very size of my house gives the hope of hitting by chance on some of its far-flung passages. I certainly have the advantage of being in my own house and knowing all the passages and how they run. A robber may easily become my victim, and a succulent one too. But I'm growing old. I'm not as strong as many others, and my enemies are countless. It could well happen that in flying from one enemy, I might run to the jaws of another. Anything might happen. In any case, I must have the confident knowledge that somewhere there is an exit easy to reach and quite free, where I have to do nothing whatever to get out, so that I might never, heaven shield us, suddenly feel the teeth of the pursuer in my flank while I am desperately burrowing away, even if it is loose, easy soil. And it is not only by external enemies that I am threatened. There are also enemies in the bowels of the earth. I have never seen them, but legend tells of them, and I firmly believe in them. They are creatures of the inner earth. Not even legend can describe them. They come. You hear the scratching of their claws just under you in the ground, which is their element, and you are lost. Here it is of no avail to console myself with the thought that you are in your own house. Far rather are you in theirs. Not even my exit could save me from them. Indeed, it is in all probability it would not save me in any case, but rather betray me. Yet it is a hope, and I cannot live without it. Apart from this main exit, I am also connected with the outer world by quite narrow, tolerably safe patches, which provide me with good, fresh air to breathe. They are the work of the field mice. I make judicious use of them, transforming them into an organic part of my burrow. They also give me the possibility of scenting things from afar, and thus serve as a protection. All sorts of small fry, too, come running through them, and I devour these, so I can have a certain amount of subterranean hunting, sufficient for a modest way of life, without leaving my burrow at all. And that is naturally a great advantage. But the most beautiful thing about my burrow is the stillness. Of course, that is deceptive. At any moment may be shattered, and then it all be over. For the time being, however, the silence is still with me. For hours I can stroll through my passages and hear nothing except for the rustling of some little creature, which I may immediately reduce to silence between my jaws, or the pattering of soil, which draws my attention to the need for repair. Otherwise, all is still. The fragrance of the woods floats in. The place feels both warm and cool. Sometimes I lie down and roll about in the passages with pure joy. When autumn sets in, and to possess a burrow like mine, and a roof over your head, is great good fortune for anyone getting on in years. Every 100 yards I have widened the passages into little round cells. There I can curl myself up in comfort and lie warm. There I sleep, the sweet sleep of tranquility, of satisfied desire, of achieved of ambition, for I possess a house. I do not know whether it is a habit that still persists from former days, or whether the perils even of this house of mine are great enough to awaken me. But invariably, every now and then, I start up out of my profound sleep and listen into the stillness which reigns here unchanged day and night, smile contentedly, and then sink with loosened limbs into still profounder sleep. Poor homeless wanderers in the roads and woods, creeping from warmth into a heap of leaves or a herd of their comrades, delivered to all perils of heaven and earth. I lie here, in a room secured on every side. There are more than 50 such rooms in my burrow, and pass as much of my time as I choose between dozing and unconscious sleep. Not quite in the center of the burrow, carefully chosen to serve as a refuge in the case of extreme danger from siege, if not from immediate pursuit, lies the chief cell. While all the rest of the burrow is the outcome rather of intense intellectual rather than physical labor, this castle keep was fashioned by the most arduous labor of my whole body. Several times in this despair brought on by physical exhaustion, I was on the point of giving up the whole business, flung myself down panting and cursed the burrow. Dragged myself outside and left the place lying open to the world. I could afford to do that, for I had no longer any wish to return to it. Until at last, after 4 hours or 4 days, Back I went repentantly, and when I saw that the burrow was unharmed, I could almost have raised a hymn of thanksgiving. And in sincere gladness in my heart started on the work anew. But my labors on the castle keep were also made harder, and unnecessarily so, unnecessarily, in that the burrow derived no real benefit from those labors, by the fact that just at the place where, according to my calculations, the castle keep should be, the soil was very loose and sandy, and it literally had to be hammered and pounded into a firm state to serve as a wall for the beautifully vaulted chamber. But for such tasks, the only tool I possessed is my forehead. So I had to run with my forehead thousands and thousands of times for whole days and nights against the ground, and I was glad when that blood came, for that was a proof that the walls were beginning to harden. And then, in that way, everybody must admit, I richly paid for my castle keep. In the castle keep, I assemble my stores. Everything over and above my daily wants that I capture inside the burrow, and everything I bring back with me from my hunting expeditions outside, I pile up here. The place is so spacious that food for over half a year scarcely fills it. Consequently, I can divide up my stores, their various smells, and reckon up exactly how much they represent. That done, I can always arrange accordingly and make my calculations and hunting plans for the future, taking into account the season of the year. There are times when I am so well provided for that in my indifference to food, I never even touch the smaller fry that scuttle about the burrow, which, however, is probably imprudent of me. My constant preoccupation with defensive measures involve a frequent alteration or modification, though within narrow limits, of my views on how the building can best be organized for that end. Then it sometimes seems risky to make the castle keep the basis of defense. The ramifications of the burrow present me with manifold possibilities, and it seems more and more in accordance with prudence than to divide up my stores somewhat and put part of them in certain of the smaller rooms. I mark off every third room, let us say, as a reserve storeroom, or every fourth room as a main, and every second as an auxiliary storeroom, and so forth. Or I ignore certain passages altogether and store no food in them, so as to throw any enemy off the scent. Or I choose quite at random a very few rooms according to their distance from the main exit. Each of these new plans involves, of course, heavy work. I have to make my calculations and then carry my stores to their new place. True, I can do that at my leisure and without any hurry. It is not at all unpleasant to carry such good food in your jaws, to lie down and rest whenever you like, and to nibble an occasional tasty tidbit. But it is not so pleasant when, as sometimes happens, you suddenly fancy, starting up from your sleep, that the present distribution of your stores is completely and totally wrong. Might lead to some great dangers. It must be set right at once, no matter how tired or sleepy you may be. Then I rush, then I fly, then I have no time for calculation, and although I was about to execute a perfectly new, perfectly exact plan, I now seize whatever my teeth hit upon and drag it or carry it away, sighing, groaning, stumbling, and even the most haphazard change to the present situation, which seems so terribly dangerous, can satisfy me. Until little by little, full wakefulness sobers me, and I can hardly understand my panic haste, breathe in deeply the tranquility of my house, which I myself have disturbed, return to my resting place, fall asleep at once in a new one exhaustion, and on awakening find hanging from my jaws, say, a rat, as indubitable proof of night labors which already seem almost unreal. Then again, there are times when the storing of all my food in one place seems the best plan of all. Of what use to me could my stores in those small rooms be? How much could I store there in any case? And whatever I put there would block the passage and be a greater hindrance than help to me if I were pursued and had to fly. Besides, it is stupid but true that one's self-conceit suffers if one cannot see all one's stores together. And so, at one glance, you know how much one possesses. And in dividing up my food in those various ways, might not a great deal get lost? I can't always be scouring through all my passages and cross passages so as to make sure that everything is in order. The idea of dividing up my stores is of course a good one, but only if one had several rooms similar to my castle keep. Several such rooms, indeed. And who was to build them? In any case, they could not be worked into the general plan of my burrow at this late stage. But I will admit that this is a fault in my burrow. It is always a fault to have only one piece of anything. And I confess, too, that during the whole time I was constructing the burrow, a vague idea that I should have more cells stirred in my head. Vaguely, yet clearly enough if I had only welcomed it. I did not yield to it. I felt far too feeble for the enormous labor it would involve. More, I felt feeble even to admit to myself the necessity for that labor, and comforted myself as best I could with the vague hope that a building, which in any case would clearly be inadequate, would in my own unique, exceptional, and favored case suffice, presumably, because Providence wasn't interested in the preservation of my forehead, that unique instrument. So I have only one castle keep, but my dark premonitions that one would not suffice have faded. However, that may be, I must content myself with the one big chamber. The smaller ones are simply no substitute for it. And so, when this conviction has grown on me, I begin once more to haul all my stores back from them to the castle keep. For some time afterwards, I find myself a certain comfort in having all the passages and rooms free, and seeing my stores growing in the castle keep and emitting their variegated and mingled smells, each of which delights me in its own fashion, and every one of which I can distinguish even at a distance, as far as the very remotest passages. Then I usually enjoy periods of particular tranquility in which I change my sleeping place by stages, always working in towards the center of the burrow, always steeping myself more profoundly on the mingled smells, until at last I can no longer refrain from myself in one night's rush into the castle keep, mightily fling myself upon my stores, and glut myself with the best that I can seize until I am completely gorged. Happy but dangerous hours, anyone who knew how to exploit them could destroy me with ease and without any risk. Here, too, the absence of a second or third large storeroom works to my detriment, for it is the single huge accumulated mass of food that seduces me. I try to guard myself in various ways against this danger. Distribution of my stores in the smaller rooms is really one of these expedients. But unfortunately, like such expedients, it leads to renunciation to still greater greed, which, overruling my intelligence, makes me arbitrarily alter my plans of defense to suit its ends. To regain my composure after such lapses, I make a practice of reviewing the burrow, and after the necessary improvements have been carried out, frequently leave it, though only for a short spell. Even at such moments, the hardship of being without it for a long time seems too punitive for me. Yet, I recognize clearly the need for occasional short excursions. It's with certain solemnity that I approach the exit again. During my spells of home life, I avoid it, steer clear even of the outer windings of the corridor that leads to it. Besides, it is no easy job to wander about there, for I have contrived there a whole little maze of passages. It was there that I began my burrow, and at a time when I had no hope of ever completing it and according to my plans, I began half in play at that corner, and so my first joy in labor found riotous satisfaction there in a labyrinth burrow, which at the time seemed to me the crown of all burrows, but which I judge today, perhaps with more justice, to be too much of an idle tour de force, not really worthy of the rest of the burrow, and though perhaps theoretically brilliant. Here is my main entrance. I said in those days, ironically, addressing my invisible enemies and seeing them already caught and stifled in the outer labyrinth. It is in reality a flimsy piece of jugglery that would hardly withstand a serious attack, or the struggles of an enemy fighting for his life. Should I reconstruct this part of my burrow? I keep on postponing the decision, and the labyrinth will probably remain as it is. Apart from the sheer hard work that I should have to face, the task would also be the most dangerous imaginable. When I began the burrow, I could work away at it in a comparative peace of mind. The risk wasn't much greater than any other risk. But to attempt that today would be to draw the whole world's attention, and gratuitously, to my burrow. Today, the whole thing is impossible. I am almost glad of that, for I still have a certain sentiment about this first achievement of mine, and if a serious attack were attempted, what pattern of entrance at all would be likely to save me? An entrance can deceive, can lead astray, can give the attacker no end of worry, and the present one can too do that at a pinch. But a really serious attack has to be met by an instantaneous mobilization of all the resources in the burrow and all the forces of my body and soul. That is self-evident. So this entrance can very well remain where it is. The burrow has so many unavoidable defects imposed by natural causes that it can surely stand this one defect, for which I am responsible, for which I recognize as a defect, even if only after the event. In spite of that, however, I do not deny that this fault worries me from time to time. Indeed, always, if I am on my customary rounds, I avoid this part of the burrow. The fundamental reason is that the sight of it is painful to me. Because I do not want to be perpetually reminded of a defect in my house, even if that defect is only too disturbingly present in my mind. Let it continue to exist ineradicably at the entrance. I can at least refuse to look at it as long as that is possible. If I merely walk in the direction of the entrance, even though I may be separated from it by several passages and rooms, I find myself sensing an atmosphere of great danger. Actually, as if my hair were growing thin, and in a moment might fly off and leave me bare and shivering, exposed to the howls of my enemies. Yes, the mere thought of the door itself, the end of the domestic protection, brings such feelings with it, yet it is the labyrinth leading up to it that torments me most of all. Sometimes I dream that I have reconstructed it, transformed it completely, quickly in a night, with a giant strength, nobody having noticed, and it is now impregnable. The nights in which such dreams come to me are the sweetest I know. Tears of joy and deliverance still glisten on my beard when I waken. So I must thread the tormenting complications of this labyrinth, physically as well as mentally, whenever I go out, and I am both exasperated and touched when, as sometimes happens, I lose myself for a moment in my own maze, and the work of my hand seems to be still doing its best to prove its sufficiency to me, its maker, whose final judgment has long since been passed on it. But then I find myself beneath the mossy covering, which has been left untouched for so long, for I stay for long spells in my house that it has grown fast to the soil around it, and now only a little push with my head is needed, and I am in the upper world. For a long time I did not dare to make that little movement, and if it were not that I would have to traverse the labyrinth once more, it would certainly leave the matter for the time being and turn back again. Just think, your house is protected and self-sufficient. You live in peace, warm and well nourished, sole master of all your manifold passages and rooms, and all this you are prepared not to give up, of course, but to risk it, so to speak. You nurse the confident hope, certainly, that you will regain it. Yet it is not. Is it not a far too dangerous stake that you are playing for? Can there be any reasonable grounds for such a step? No. For such acts as these, there are no reasonable grounds. But all the same, I then cautiously raise the trap door and slip outside. Let it softly fall back again, and fly as fast as I can from the treacherous spot. Yet I am not really free. True, I am no longer confined by narrow passages, but hunt through the open woods and feel new powers awakening in my body for which there was no room. As it were, in the Burrow, not even in the castle keep, though it had been 10 times as big. The food too is better up here, though hunting is more difficult, success more rare, the results are more valuable. From every point of view, I did not deny all this. I appreciate it and take advantage of it at least as fully as anyone else, but probably more fully, for I do not hunt like a vagrant out of mere idleness or desperation, but calmly and methodically. Also, I am not permanently doomed to this free life, for I know that my term is measured, that I do not have to hunt here forever, and that whenever I am weary of this life and do wish to leave it, someone whose invention I shall not be able to withstand will, so to speak, summon me to him. And so I can pass the time. My time is here quite without care and in complete enjoyment. Or rather, I could, yet I cannot. My Burrow takes up too much of my thoughts. I fled from my entrance fast enough, and as soon as I am back at it again, I seek out a good hiding place and keep watching the entrance of my house. This time from outside. For whole days and nights, call it foolish if you like, if it gives me infinite pleasure and reassures me. At such times, it is as if I were not so much looking at my house as I am at myself sleeping, and had the joy of being in a profound slumber, and simultaneously of keeping vigilant guard over myself. I am privileged, as it were, not only to dream about the specters of the night, and all the helplessness and blind trust of sleep, but also, at the same time, to confront them in actuality with the calm judgment of the fully awake. And strangely enough, I discovered that my situation is not so bad as I had often thought, and will probably think again when I return to my house. In this connection, and maybe on others too, but in this one especially, these excursions of mine are truly indispensable. Carefully, as I have chosen out of the way place from my door, the traffic that passes is nevertheless, if one takes a week's observation, very great, but so it is, no doubt, in all its inhabited regions. And probably it is actually better to hazard the risks of the dense traffic, whose very impetus carries it past, than to be delivered in complete solitude to the first persistently searching intruder. Here enemies are numerous and their allies and accomplices still more numerous, but they fight one another, and while thus employed, rush past my burrow without noticing it. In all my time, I never see anyone investigating the actual door of my house, which is fortunate both for me and for him, for I would certainly have launched myself at his throat, forgetting everything else in the anxiety for my burrow. True, creatures coming in whose vicinity I dare not remain, and from whom I have to fly as soon as I scent them in the distance, on the attitude of the burrow that I really can't pronounce with certainty, but It is at least a reassurance that when I presently return, I never find any of them there, and the entrance is undamaged. There have been happy periods in which I could almost assure myself the enmity of the world towards me had ceased or been assuaged, or that the strength of the Burrow had raised me above the destructive struggle for former times. The Burrow was probably protecting me in more ways than I thought or dared think when I was inside it. This fancy used to have such a hold over me that I have been seized by the childish desire never to return to the Burrow again, but to settle down somewhere close to the entrance, to pass my life watching the entrance and gloat perpetually upon the reflection, and that in that find that my happiness, how steadfast in protection my Burrow would be if I were inside it. Well, one is soon roughly awakened from childish dreams. What does this protection which I am looking at here from the outside amount to after all? Dare I estimate the danger which I run inside the Burrow from observations which I make when I am outside? Can my enemies, to begin with, have any proper awareness of me that I am not in my Burrow? A certain awareness of me they certainly have, but not full awareness. Not full awareness. And it is not that full awareness that real definition of a state of danger. So the experiments I attempt here are only half experiments, or even less calculated merely to reassure my fears that by giving me false reassurance to lay me open to great perils. No, I do not watch over my own sleep as I imagined. Rather, it is I who sleep, while the destroyer watches. Perhaps he is one of those who pass the entrance without seeming to notice it, concerned merely to ascertain, just like myself, that the door is still untouched and waits for their attack, and only pass because they know the master of the house is out, or because they are quite aware that he is guilelessly lying on the watch in the bushes close by. And I leave my post of observation and find I have had enough of this outside life, and I feel that there is nothing more that I can learn here, either now or any time. And I long to say that I last goodbye to everything up here, to go down to my Burrow, never to return again, let things take their course, and try not to retard them with my profitless vigils. But spoiled by seeing for such a long time everything that happened around the entrance, I find great difficulty in summoning the resolution to carry out the actual descent, which might easily draw anyone's attention. And without knowing what is happening behind my back and behind the door after it is fastened, I take advantage of stormy nights to get over the necessary preliminaries and quickly bundle in my spoil. That seems to have come off. Whether it has really come off will only be known when I myself have made the descent. It will be known, but not by me or by me, but too late. So I give up the attempt and do not make the descent. I take an experimental burrow, naturally at a good distance from the real entrance, a burrow just as long as myself, and seal it also with a covering of moss. I creep into my hole, close to it after me, wait patiently, keep vigil for long or short spells, and at various hours of the day, then fling off the moss, issue from my hole, and summarize my observations. These are extremely heterogeneous, and both good and bad, but I have never been able to discover a universal principle or an infallible method of descent. In consequence of all this, I have not yet summoned the resolution to make my actual descent, and I'm thrown into despair at the necessity of doing it soon. I almost screw myself to the point of deciding to emigrate to distant parts and take up my old comfortless life again, which had no security whatever. But was one indiscriminate succession of perils yet in consequence prevented one from perceiving and fearing particular perils, as I am constantly reminded by comparing my secure burrow with ordinary life. Certainly such a decision would be an arrant piece of folly, produced simply by living too long in a senseless freedom. The burrow is still mine. I have only to take a single step and I am safe. And I tear myself free from all my doubts, and by broad daylight rush to the door, quite resolved to raise it now. But I cannot. I rush past it and fling myself into a thorn bush, deliberately, as a punishment. A punishment for some sin I do not know of. And then, at the last moment, I am forced to admit to myself that I was right after all, and that it was really impossible to go down in the burrow without exposing the thing that I love best, for a little while at least, to all my enemies, on the ground, in the trees, in the air. And the danger is by no means a fanciful one, but very real. It need not be any particular enemy that has provoked to pursue me. It may very well be some chance innocent little creature, some disgusting little beast which follows me out of curiosity, and thus, without knowing it, becomes the leader of all the world against me. Nor need it be even that. It may be, and that'll be just as bad. Indeed, in some respects worse, it may be someone of my own kind. A connoisseur and a prizer of burrows, a hermit, a lover of peace, but all the same a filthy scoundrel who wishes to be housed where he has not built. If it were actually to arrive now, and if in his obscene lust he were to discover the entrance and set about working at it, lifting the moss as if he were actually to succeed, if he were actually to wriggle in his way in my stead, until only his hindquarters still showed, if all this were to actually happen, so that at last, casting all prudence to the winds, I might, in my blind rage, leap on him, maul him, tear him the flesh from his bones, destroy him, drink his blood, and fling his corpse among the rest of my spoil. But above all, that is the main thing. Were at last back in my burrow once more, I would have it in my heart to greet the labyrinth itself with rapture. But first, I would draw the moss covering over me, and I would want to rest, it seems to me, for all the remainder of my life. But nobody comes, and I am left to my own resources, perpetually obsessed by the sheer difficulty of the attempt. I lose much of my timidity. I no longer attempt to even appear to avoid the entrance, but make a hobby of prowling around it. By now it is almost as if I am the enemy spying out a suitable opportunity for successfully breaking in. If I only had someone I could trust to keep watch at my post of observation, then of course I could descend into perfect peace of mind. I would make an agreement with this trusty confederate of mine that he would keep a careful note of the state of things during my descent, and for quite a long time afterwards, and if he saw any sign of danger, knock on the moss covering, and if he saw nothing, do nothing. With that, a clean sweep would be made of all my fears, no residue will be left, or at most my confidant. For would he not demand some counter service from me? Would he not at least want to see my burrow? That in itself, to let anyone freely into my burrow, would be exquisitely painful to me. I built it for myself, not for visitors, and I think that I would refuse to admit him, not even though he alone made it possible for me to get into my burrow, would I let him in. But I simply could not admit him. For either I must let him go in first by himself, which is simply unimaginable, or we must both descend at the same time, in which case the advantage I am supposed to derive from him, that of being kept watch over, will be lost. And what trust could I really put in him? Can I trust one whom I have had under my eyes just as fully when I can't see him, and the moss covering separates us? It is comparatively easy to trust anyone if you are supervising him, or at least can supervise him. Perhaps it is possible to even trust someone at a distance. But completely to trust someone outside the burrow when you are inside the burrow, that is, in a different world, that is, that, it seems to me, is impossible. But such considerations are not in the least necessary. The mere reflection is enough that during or after my descent, one of the countless accidents of existence might prevent my confidant, from fulfilling his duty, and what incalculable results might not the smallest accident of that kind have for me? No. If one takes it, by and large, I have no right to complain that I am alone and have nobody that I can trust. I certainly lose nothing by that, and probably spare myself trouble. I can only trust myself and my Burrow. Should have thought of that before and taken measures to meet the difficulty that worries me so much now. When I began the Burrow, it would not at least have been partly possible. I should have so constructed the first passage that it had two entrances at a moderate distance from each other, so that after descending through the one entrance with that slowness which is unavoidable, I might rush at once through the passage to the second entrance, slightly raise the moss covering, which would be so arranged as to make that easy, and from there keep watch to the position for several days and nights. That would have been the only right way of doing it. True, the two entrances would double the risk, but that consideration need not delay me, for one of my entrances, serving merely as a post of observation, could be quite narrow. And with that, I lose myself in a maze of technical speculations. I begin once more to dream of my dream of a completely perfect Burrow, and that somewhat calms me. With closed eyes, I behold with delight perfect or almost perfect structural devices for enabling me to slip out and in unobserved. While I lie there thinking such things, I admire these devices very greatly, but only as technical achievements, not as real advantages. For this freedom to slip out in at will, what does it amount to? It is the mark of after restless nature, of inner uncertainty, disputable desires, evil propensities that seem still worse when one thinks of the Burrow, which is there at one's hand and can flood one with peace if only one remains quite open and receptive to it. For the present, however, I am outside it and seeking some possibility of returning, and for that the necessary technical devices would be very desirable, but perhaps not so desirable after all. Is it not the very grave injustice to the Burrow to regard it in moments of nervous panic as a mere hole into which one can creep and be safe? Certainly it is a hole among other things, and a safe one, or should be. And when I picture myself in the midst of danger, then I insist with clenched teeth and all my will that the Burrow should be nothing but a hole set apart to save me, and that it should fulfill that clearly defined function with the greatest possible efficiency, and I am ready to resolve it from every other duty. Now the truth of the matter, and one has no eye for that in times of great peril, and only by a great effort, even in times when danger is threatening, is that in reality the Burrow does provide a considerable degree of security, but by no means enough. For is one ever free from anxieties inside it? These anxieties are different from ordinary ones, prouder, richer in content, often long repressed, but in their destructive effects, they are perhaps much the same as the anxieties the existence in the outer world gives rise to. Had I constructed the Burrow exclusively to assure my safety, I would not have been disappointed. It is true, nevertheless, the relation between the enormous labor involved and the actual security it would provide, at least insofar as I can feel it and profit by it, would not have been in my favor. It is extremely painful to have to admit such things to oneself, but one is forced to do it, confronted by the entrance over there, which now literally locks and bars itself against me, the builder and possessor. Yet the burrow is not a mere hole for taking refuge in. When I stand in the castle keep, surrounded by my piled up stores, surveying the 10 passages which begin there, raised and sunken passages, vertical and rounded passages, wide and narrow passages, then the general plan dictates, and all alike still and empty, ready by their various routes to conduct me to all other rooms, which are also still and empty. Then all thought of mere safety is far from my mind, and I know that here is my castle, which I have wrestled from the refractory soil with tooth and claw, and pounding and hammering blows, my castle which can never belong to anyone else, and is so essentially mine that I can calmly accept in it even my enemy's mortal stroke at the final hour. For my blood will ebb away here in my own soil and not be lost. And what but that is the meaning of the blissful hours which I pass, now peacefully slumbering now, happily keeping watch in these passages which suit me so well, where one can stretch oneself out in comfort. Roll about in childish delight, lie and dream, or sink into blissful sleep, in the smaller rooms, each familiar to me, so familiar that in spite of their complete similarity, I can clearly distinguish one from the other, with my eyes shut by the mere feel of the wall. They enclose me more peacefully and warmly than a bird is enclosed in its nest, and all, still and empty. But if that is the case, why do I hang back? Why do I dread the thought of the intruding enemy more than the possibility of never seeing my burrow again? Well, the latter alternative is fortunately an impossibility. There is no need for me even to take the thought to know what the burrow means to me. I and the burrow belong so indissolubly together that in spite of all my fears, I could not make myself quite comfortable out here, and not even need to overcome my repugnance and open the door. I could be quite content to wait here passively, for nothing can part us for long, and somehow or other I shall quite certainly find myself in my burrow again. But on the other hand, how much time may pass before then, and how many things may happen in that time, up here no less than down there. And it lies with me solely to curtail that interval into what is necessary at once. And then, too exhausted to be any longer capable of thought, my head banging, my legs trembling with fatigue, half asleep, feeling my way rather than walking, and I approached the entrance, slowly raised the moss covering, slowly descended, leaving the door open in my distraction for a needlessly long time. And presently, remember my omission, and get out again to make it good. But need was there to get out for that? All that was needed was to draw the moss covering right. So I creep in again, and now at last draw to the moss covering. Only in this state, and in this state alone, can I achieve my descent. So at last I lie down beneath the moss on top of my blood-stained soil, and can now enjoy my longed-for sleep. Nothing disturbs me, nothing. No one has tracked me down. Above my moss, everything seems to be quiet, thus far at least. But even if it were not all quiet, even if all were not quiet, I question whether I could stop to keep watch now. I have changed my place. I have left the upper world and I am in my burrow, and I feel its effects at once. It is a new world, endowing me with new powers, and what I feel as fatigue up there is no longer that here. I have returned from a journey dog-tired with my wanderings. But a sight of the old house, the thought of all things that are waiting to be done, the necessity at least to cast a glance at all the rooms, but above, to make my way immediately to the castle keep. All this transforms my fatigue into ardent zeal. It is as though the moment when I set foot in the burrow, I had wakened from a long and profound sleep. My first task is a very laborious one and requires all my attention. I mean getting my spoil through the narrow and thin walled passages of the labyrinth.